Peace, peace, peace. Welcome to another episode of Waz the Dome TV. Today, I have a very special guest. You've definitely seen him on the show before. He's a scholar, someone who teaches, writes. He also has his own YouTube channel, which I'm pretty sure most of you guys know. But if you're not familiar, the link will be in the description. But again, it's always a pleasure to have these bills with Brother Asar Imhotep. Thank you for coming through, man.
And blessings. Thank you for having me, and it's good to be back.
Indeed, indeed. I wanted to have this conversation about this idea of relying on experts because it was something that I had heard a lot on different channels and different discourses on different channels. And then I remember you actually did a show on it on your channel as well. And I just thought it was a great topic because obviously experts are experts for a reason, but there are, in my opinion, pros and cons to simply just relying on experts as if they are always infallible. And so, with your own research and with your own, background in research, when it comes to different things of linguistics, science, history, you know, things related to culture. How do you integrate, these things like science and cultural studies within your methodology? Because a lot of times, especially whenever we are learning about non-European cultures or non-European societies, there tends to be a lack of cultural nuance that gets, uh, put on display. And so I just wanted to kind of ask you about your own personal methodologies and how you choose to, and integrate science, cultural studies, and anything else that might help you fill in those blanks that people who lack nuance may not be able to do.
It's a very large question or a series of questions.
Right.
So we'll try to answer as best as I can. And I've actually kind of prepared some notes,
Hmm.
and maybe we can get to them later
Okay.
because, I have this saying that demonstration beats conversation.
Mm.
And I can better show you than I can tell you.
Hmm.
So where the science comes in,
Hmm.
right? The ability to isolate variables, to develop experiments, and to test those experiments so that you can come to a more likely, truthful outcome in terms of interpreting some aspect of reality. And this is where a lot of things kind of get confused
Hmm.
for a lot of folks because we use terms and we may not understand them fully,
Hmm.
right? And so we know that, for example, science etymologically comes from an Indo-European root meaning to know, but is really in terms of modern science, it is being able to know either by experimentation or by being able to do.
Mm.
Right? It's not simply about something that you heard or
Right.
something that you read,
Hmm.
right? And a lot of times, and you mentioned in our discourse or at the beginning of this discourse that we've had these conversations in the quote unquote conscious community and online media spaces. And in these online media spaces, oftentimes there's kind of opposing sides that are arguing.
Right.
And in order to somehow win the argument, at least in their eyes, what someone will do is find a book with somebody that has the word or the letters doctor behind them and say because this person said so, then that's it. That's the end of the discussion, right? And thus the reason for this conversation, right? Because there's a lot of nuances, not only in just African cultures, but even in the academic realm itself. And so everything is not weighted the same, right? Like a doctor in astrophysics is not the same as a doctor in, social anthropology, right?
Right.
So the doctor in astrophysics is studying phenomena that does not have agency unto itself, meaning it follows a set of rules of universal laws and it does not deviate. And what we're trying to do as astrophysicists is to discover those laws that make phenomena behave in the way that it does. Well, human groups do not operate that way. Outside of the physical laws for which we are trapped, the agency of us doesn't follow any laws. Otherwise, we would not have court systems, right? Because at every stop sign, every human being would stop.
Right.
Regardless of race, color, gender, age, that's what would happen. But you can decide one day, F this dang stop sign, I'm gonna run it. Right?
Right.
So to understand that behavior, you need a whole new set of rules and conversations and research questions that has to go on. And a lot of these conversations that people are having conversations that belong in the social realm, but trying to use jargon and language and methods from the physical science realm. And this is not only an online media, social media phenomenon, even in the academic world. And there's reasons behind this. And so there's this thing that is called physics envy, right? Because the mathematical and physical physics world and biological world, they were on the role of discovering things about the universe that had much more application, not only in terms of knowledge, but in terms of business and things of that nature, right? That we can rely on, right? Like, knowing about flight and how things are able to, resist gravity and to be able to calculate the forces and the like. Those things allow us to build, airplanes and rocket ships and, whole industries are created behind it. But when it comes to the social, quote unquote, sciences or academic fields, it's not so much that we can get certain things right about society, because whatever you study only exists in a particular phenomena, in a particular context, in a particular place, in a particular time, which may not be repeated ever again outside of your study.
Right.
But in academia, all the funding was going towards the physical sciences and the biological sciences. And so this is where the physics envy comes in, because now we got to make the social academic fields seem more rigorous, like the mathematics, physics, biological fields. Right? So you get a lot of this borrowing of terms. And, we'll discuss that a little bit when we get back to the linguistics aspect. Because when we start talking about genetically related languages, there's no genetics in language.
Right.
There's no There's no biological genes that you pass on that your children will speak the same language as you,
Right, right.
right? But
Mm,
we're borrowing terms from the biological sciences. I don't think it's in a sense of physics envy, but it doesn't apply in the same way that genes in genealogical inheritance and the like is found in the biological sciences. So this is what I mean by it's kind of we got to
yeah.
at least have um, that understanding, that foundation before we could even get into the nuances. So I know there were some other questions you asked in there, and I want to make sure that I answer them.
No,
Which ones that I didn't answer?
no, no. I think you. I think you have. I think the maybe the only one that you didn't answer was, you know, I guess when and as you mentioned, there are a lot of words and with the idea of physics envy. Um, when we look at linguistics, language family, genetics, right? Like there's obviously we understand what they're trying to say. But when it comes to, I guess, research methodologies in itself, um, how, I guess, how do you personally navigate the two? And if that's something that we have to get into a little bit later in the conversation, whatever you pull out some of your notes, we can definitely do that too. Because I have some other things that I would like to ask you as well while we're here.
Indeed.
And
Again, I hope to. Oh, and I wanted to say this first before I go there.
yeah.
So it can be the reverse as well.
Hmm.
So this is where the issue of bias comes in, right?
Hmm.
Because in the physical sciences, the objective is to try to eliminate as much as possible human bias in the research process, right?
Hmm.
But the social scientists are saying that it's almost impossible to do that because even the very activity of science itself is a human endeavor,
Right. Right.
right? So
Hmm.
there's going to be some level of your culture,
Hmm.
your cultural understanding and the like that is involved in at minimum interpreting the data. So let's
Hmm.
just say that you are able to eliminate human bias from the experimental process, right? Like if we have a large hadron collider,
Hmm.
right? It I doubt it cares if it's going to change its results because a black person pushed the button versus a white person pushed the
Right.
button
Right.
versus an old Asian man pushes the button. Like it's operating off of physical laws, right?
Hmm.
That doesn't care about anything of your social biases per se. But um, but that's part of the physics envy as well because a lot of them try to eliminate the human bias and think there's a universal way that
Yeah.
you can interpret other human groups, which
Hmm.
ultimately you ends up being the way the European people do it.
Right. Well,
Right? That's what they mean to say.
yeah. That's what
Right?
exactly. That's what I wanted to I guess kind of talk more about is whenever we study and especially like when we start going into black studies or Africology and we and even anti-colonial studies, right? This whole idea of universality is steeped in white supremacy because at the end of the day that universality is a European way of a European methodology, a European interpretation of history, a European interpretation of data that is imposed on everybody else and that says that this is the universal way of seeing this thing, right? And so when we look at academia itself, and you mentioned biases, right? And whenever we look at, let's say we look at AI, right? there are inherited biases within, different AI software, more than likely from the programmer. And whenever we look at different disciplines within academia, and this whole idea that, like you said, within our community, sometimes when somebody wants to prove an argument, they'll go get a book. It'll have Dr. Such and such on it, and it'll say, this is what he said. So that's supposed to be seen as infallible. But a lot of times I don't feel like we are talking about some of the inherent biases in the structure of the said discipline that won't allow the person in that discipline to deviate outside of this universality that's imposed on them. When we look at different things, whether it's white supremacy within, the foundations of certain academic research and disciplines and methodology, uh, or to the ideas. When we look, like, with Edward Said, when he wrote Orientalism and how things are viewed in academia at one time, at least, in the Levant, North Africa, Middle East, and such, and the inherent biases and racism that were baked into those studies. I don't feel like we can simply just always say, depending on, obviously, what the discipline is. I understand it more when we're talking about physics and things that deal with the laws of the universe and actual, sciences to this degree. But when we're talking about, cultural anthropology, linguistics, history, different social sciences, don't we always have to be aware of the inherent biases within those disciplines, instead of just saying, hey, this expert within this discipline said this, and so this has to be true?
I think what has to be mentioned as well is that we always got to remember that in these public spaces, we're dealing with people at various different educational levels, not only in terms of completed schooling, whether we're talking about high school, college, and advanced degrees, but just in one's independent schooling as well, right? Um, and so, back in the day, they used to have the bad kids in one class, the advanced kids in one class, the people with special needs in another class, right?
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the internet is that everybody's in the same class now.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody wants to raise their hand and answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about the special needs kids,
Mm-hmm.
the bad kids,
Mm-hmm.
that are slow but not special needs per se. They
Mm-hmm.
just have a tendency not to want to do the work,
Right.
right?
Right.
And then you have the advanced students, and then you have the teachers. That's
Mm-hmm.
all in the same class.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, so we may be having advanced conversations that are for the advanced students, but it's all the special needs kids wanting to have the debates and the arguments. And this is what we find online a lot,
Right.
right? So, uh, so that's one thing. We gotta understand that we're everybody's grouped online in the same class, regardless of educational level. And so those who have gone and went through advanced schooling, master's, PhD level, or have done an apprenticeship, under individuals who have done that route. You know that methodology is supreme.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, a lot of us have read some texts with conclusions, but they don't read and study the text on research methods in that field.
Mm.
And the reason why the research methods in that field set of books and workbooks and the like is important is because, you know, nothing is really kind of new nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
These subjects have been studied, if not thousands, at least, you know, in a very serious way, a couple hundred years. So there's been trial and error already to where they can kind of come to a consensus about, you know, why this works and why this doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to study the research methods text and go through that process. And it all depends on if you are just an enthusiast versus a teacher versus a scholar.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference. An enthusiast, you know, I just want to know the information.
Right.
And because I'm just trying to use it to, you know, enlighten myself, to find some beneficial information and methods to improve the life of myself and my family.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a different expectation for you as an enthusiast who just interested in the subject
Mm-hmm.
versus someone who is going to teach the information.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He's learning. This person, he or she, is going to read a bit more so that they know the different schools of thought and are able to regurgitate it and find they're more concerned with pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which we teach pedagogy literally is for kids, but we kind of use it for that term for adults, even though andragogy is the name, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but you're concerned with teaching, finding ways to transfer this information to other bodies in ways in which they understand.
Mm-hmm.
But the researcher is looking for gaps in the scholarship, trying to see if the arguments that are made previously are sound in the subject, or they may be more exploratory. They're trying to find new information, you know, in this particular field.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes people will want to have discussions as if they are in the researcher's lane when they are in fact in the enthusiast lane.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
And so saying all this to say that we have to know our place in the subject.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When it comes to black holes, and you know, space-time, warps, and all this other kind of stuff, I am an enthusiast.
Mm-hmm.
I love the subject.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not finna get on Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast and argue with this man about, you know, astrophysics phenomena. It's just, right. I'm not finna do it. That's not my lane. I know where I fit. Mm-hmm. I know my position. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not even a teacher in this per se.
Right.
Right. Like I have a good understanding of a lot because of my computer science background. I can understand certain formulas and the like. So I have an upper leg than the ordinary person. But I know for a fact I'm not finna argue you know, with Dr. Sean Carroll
Right.
and others, about gravity and Minkowski space
Mm.
and all this other kind. It's just not that's not my lane,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have folks that try to jump in the Africana studies lane who don't study Africana studies.
Right.
Like it's a field. Africology is a field of study.
Right.
It has prominent researchers in the field. It has methodologies that had to be adhered to, frameworks,
Mm-hmm.
theories within the field that you have to understand
Mm-hmm.
in order to enter into these conversations in the Africological space.
Right.
Right? You
Mm-hmm.
just can't say I'm black
Yeah.
and I read some black books.
Mm-hmm.
I'm finna argue, on the net about this, and this. It don't work that way,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
And all disciplines in the modern age, to an extent, is multidisciplinary.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have to have some working knowledge about other fields in order to answer certain questions in your primary field,
Right.
right? If not, this is why the having research teams is important,
Absolutely.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
where I can we can ask a general set of research questions, and we each attack the research question from our area of expertise, and then we come together and synthesize the data,
Right.
right? So I may study, for example, a myth in a particular African culture, and it may explain certain things, but I have an idea that it may relate to some kind of volcanic activity.
Mm-hmm.
Now I go get my volcano person, and they can do some samples, and like, yeah, around this time, this is this and this is what we know, and this is a da 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 da. So it adds an area. Okay, so more than likely, so when we come together, it's like more than likely this physical phenomena happen around this time, which inspired this myth,
Yeah.
creation in order to teach. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Like, this is how you come together and synthesize the data from the different fields,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you couldn't use simply the volcanic information to discuss linguistic matters over here,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or this and that. It has to make sense in a way. Like it has to be um as truthful as possible within its own field
Mm-hmm.
before you can use it in other fields and try to synthesize the data and create a narrative. Because at the end of the day, you're creating a story, you're creating a narrative about history and human experience, right? And so, unfortunately, to our knowledge, at least, unless you believe in Akashic records, um, we don't have this universal camera that we can just rewind the tape and look at it from what was
Mm-hmm.
going on in the room or in da 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 da, and just say, "Oh, this is exactly what happened," because we see it in the universal camera.
Right.
Nope, it's little bits of information that survives
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
in in little tiny units that we have to kind of understand each of the evidences that have been left behind and piece together a story that makes sense based upon the extant evidence. That's our
Absolutely.
job as researchers, historians, and the like.
Absolutely. I'm right now I'm reading of Black Studies again. Joshua Myers. He's
Yeah.
one of the
Dr.
Africana Studies professors at Howard, and obviously we know within the paradigm of Black Studies, but not just Black Studies, Latinx studies, a lot of studies that are dealing with, uh, you know, quote unquote oppressed people. There's an idea to decolonize academia. It's not a term that I created. right? This is a thing. A sister that I well is a Muslim woman that I watch. She's clearly she has a PhD in maybe astrophysics, but she has a YouTube channel where she's big on the idea of decolonizing the classroom. She even has a video entitled "Astronomy has a colonialism problem." And when we look at these ideas that the intellectuals before us gave us in these frameworks, like Jacob Carruthers, and understanding that information is often in the classroom is often a battlefield, right? This information can either be used to liberate or it can be used to oppress. And in many instances, when we look at ideals of um, you know Hegel and Montesquieu and just a lot of other European philosophers that help not only create that helped, I guess, conceptualize European thoughts and modes of subjugation, these a lot of these ideas became the justification for our enslavement or our state of colonization, right? And so the idea that it's just information when for African people, for quote unquote Hispanic people, for indigenous communities, it's not just information, right? This information is designed to have an effect. Again, is it going to be to liberate or is it going to be to further colonize? When we look at the idea of like the schools that they had for Native Americans, the schools that they had for Native Hawaiians, where they would outlaw the idea of you speaking your own language. They would tell their history. They would tell their history from the perspective of the colonizer, where the colonizer had a civilizing mission to clean up the savage, and these become embedded in the intellectual frameworks that we still abide by a lot of times today. And the idea that we can simply just look at what a quote unquote expert says and take that as uh, his infallible word is really doing a disservice, in my opinion, to the history of decolonial studies, to the history of Black studies, because that was the whole idea, right? Like with Carter G. Woodson saying, "Hey, like you guys might be getting, advanced education, but you're getting it to uphold the system that continues to subjugate us, right? Everything needs to be everything needs to be considered as a possible threat to our ability to create reality for ourselves." When we look at Black studies and its inception, right, with at San Francisco State University with Dr. Nathan Hare, the labor movements that were the precursor to in San Francisco to getting those to getting that Black Studies program, the Black nationalist aspect of core in that area that was happening. Again, the Panthers in the Bay Area and ideas of Black nationalism. This is what, in the beginning, Black studies was, right? It was created from these things. So, what do we think a lot of these quote unquote universal disciplines were founded in? If we had to do all of that, to be able to create our own discipline for our own selves. It's never been just this. It's never been, in my opinion, just this thing where it's simply about information. I want to learn this. I'm going to listen to this expert. This expert has a PhD, so this expert is correct. Well, a lot of times, this expert may, even if they don't necessarily have an agenda, they may be working within a framework that does have an agenda, or that was at least founded in an agenda to, in a lot of ways, justify negative tropes of African people, right? And so, what we're obviously, as you spoke earlier, we're not necessarily talking about, astrophysics or astronomy or things of that nature, or any type of sciences and that. But and then again, we can be, because there are PhDs within these fields who are, black, who are Arab, who are Asian, who are native, who feel like this field still works on a framework created with European colonialism at its foundation. And I think that's something that people don't always understand. So, in my opinion, like, I just feel like there are limitations when we simply say, hey, in order to win this argument, I'm going to rely on Dr. So and so because he said so, not understanding the political implications of a lot of the foundings of the disciplines that we study in the first place.
Yeah. So I think there's a complication here that we gotta acknowledge. And so, sometimes in a field you have space for theoretical study
Mm-hmm.
and then applied study.
Right.
And so, like, there are theoretical physicists who don't rely per se on experiment.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking at the math and seeing what is theoretically possible and trying to make predictions for future experiments to either confirm or disconfirm.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And of course, there's the applied, so there's a applied physics and mathematics that we call engineering.
Right.
Right. Like,
Right.
these folks are the whole purpose of what they're doing is to create products and services, using their understanding of math in the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's going to have more tangible applications. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes these tangible applications may not be dreamt of without the theoretical just going off the head. So just imagine, like, think about, like, all the technologies that we have now were first thought of in cartoons and comic books.
Right. 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 Right.
Right.
Right.
Like, when we think about the Jetsons and having
Mm-hmm.
cell
Flying
phones
cars.
and watches that can, you know, it somebody went and said, well, is it possible that we can do that in real life?
Mm-hmm.
And they went to work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we got to be careful, and this is kind of a problem in Africology, to where everything has to be, because it's a service academic field. You're not just a scholar, you're a scholar activist.
Right.
Right. In
Right.
Africology, you are expected to
Mm-hmm.
use this information in the service of the advancement of African people.
Right.
But sometimes you may just, like, want to sit back and not have it immediately apply to African people, but just imagine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we can come back and see if this would fit. But just imagine how, saying this would be without Europeans being at the center of the conversation and compare and contrast what African
Mhm.
people do against what European people do, right?
Right.
So there's that thing, and so um, and at the end of the day, what really matters is, does it work or does it not?
Hmm.
That's what's going to determine whether your perspective, because just because you have a Native American perspective, just because you have a European perspective, just because you have an African perspective, doesn't mean that it is true and valid or it's
Hmm.
going to work.
Right.
Right. So
Hmm.
at on some level, we have to have some space to be able to ask the question, does
Hmm.
it work?
Hmm.
Because that's what's going to matter. This is part of the historical analysis. Now of course Europeans and Arabs come into Africa, create the conditions for they can come back some time later and look like the saviors,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
if you're starving, if you're starving and you don't have access to water, it don't matter. I can't come to you with no Afrocentricity and the ancestor said da 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 da.
Right.
If I'm coming to you with water
Hmm.
and food,
Hmm.
all you going to see, that's all they're going to see, and that's what they're going to listen to.
Right.
Because if white Jesus is bringing them food, clothing, and shelter, that's what matters to the ordinary person.
Hmm.
We're in a privileged space
Hmm.
that we can have books behind us. We can
Hmm.
sit there and read Dr. Josh Myers and learn about Black studies and da 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 da. But there's a couple that is just they're just stressed out because they're worried if they got to pay for medicine, food or
Hmm.
rent this
Hmm.
week.
Hmm. Fact.
And all that Africology don't mean jack if it don't translate into food, clothing, and shelter. So
Yeah.
we always got to be mindful of those things, especially when we're having these conversations with the people. So
Yeah.
this is kind of the space that I'm in currently. Is this is why you see all these kind of creative ideas on a that I come up with and have these conversations on my channel with,
Hmm.
like Josh Shea and the like, Kimoyo, because I'm trying to figure out. I know that this stuff is applicable and this stuff works, but
Hmm.
how can I put it in a form
Hmm.
that it works for the people, that we can create industry for ourselves, because that's what it's going to ultimately mean.
Right.
Because a lot of the stuff that comes out of Europe in terms of technology is because they're trying to solve European problems.
Absolutely. Hmm. Facts.
You know,
Yeah.
and so it's they're taking these ideas and they're integrating the culture, and that's why some of their gods and goddesses is part of the names for technologies and all
Hmm.
this other kind of
Hmm.
stuff, right? But that's what we got to do. It's we got to have space for the theoretical, and
Hmm.
we have to have space for the application, and then we got to have an integrated space, saying with the culture and having it to be able to meet the needs, at basic needs. And then once you meet the people's basic needs, then we can go into the higher level stuff, and
Absolutely.
linguistics will matter, to
Yeah.
them, for example.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, no, you're right. Absolutely. That's why a lot of people may feel, and people even, who have advanced degrees and teach in universities and Africana studies departments, that in many cases it has lost its way because in the beginning it was a it was founded in the idea of nationalism and how can we meet the educational needs and the material needs of the people, when now it's become obviously something where, some are able to sit in their ivory towers and theoreticize all day, while people are starving. And I agree 100%. With that said, with you, even as someone who has studied and written about linguistics in the way that you do, haven't you come across things within the methodology on different language groups, different languages itself within Africa, that that you felt like, yo, they came up with this conclusion because of some biases that they have, right? Like, it's, don't get me wrong, they're, uh, you know, just, and I don't want to just come out and say necessarily what some of those may be, but I think we all know, whenever we are talking about different African languages and language families. But have you, I mean, haven't you come across that type of thing as far as whenever you study linguistics?
Yes, and I think I would, if you would permit me, to share my screen
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let me make sure
and
yeah, yeah. Go ahead and share.
so I'm just going to share the entire screen and so let's start from there because many of your questions and if you have a question or something,
Mhm.
please feel free
Yeah.
to to answer. Let me get rid of that. I don't know why these subtitles be coming up. So, like, here's a good example, an issue that I believe we have to have, like that's related to this conversation.
Mhm.
So, part of the study of Africana is to not simply study it as an external agent. You have to be submersed in the culture
Hmm.
to be able to explain and understand certain things, right? There's
Mhm.
just certain nuances that another person won't get unless you grew up in the culture.
Right.
You grew up speaking the language, right?
Right.
There's the academic aspect, for example, of linguistics, but then there's the cultural aspect of people who just know their own language and how they view the world and they map words to phenomena in reality, right?
Mhm.
So, like, I have on the screen here some Africanisms in the Bible. Like, like people will read this and not and just gloss over it. They'll keep reading.
Mhm.
But somebody who is immersed in African culture, it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Mm.
So in this text, um, this is Genesis 35. Allegedly God, I have to say allegedly God, because people be claiming God said and all that, and I'm not gonna get into that conversation. But the Bible states in Genesis 35. Genesis 35 is yeah, it's Genesis 35. So Genesis 35. So in 14, I believe. So then God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there and build an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So this is the Jacob and Esau story, right? And if you was a Hebrew Israelite, you have a particular interpretation of that, but we ain't gonna go there today. So it continues. Jacob set up a stone pillar at the place where God had talked with him. And he poured out a drink offering on it. He also poured oil on it.
Mm.
Now I have on the right hand side of the screen a, a creation of some sort to represent Eshu
Mm-hmm.
in the Yoruba tradition, in which we call Isheshe in the modern day, in the Isheshe tradition. And so when you're at the crossroads and when you're at an altar, when you have your shrines and whatnot, oftentimes you will be required to find, certain rocks, certain stones that represent uh, Eshu, because Eshu is the communicator between the deities and the supreme being, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you send your message to. And you have to pour on it sometimes alcohol. So you'll see people either pour alcohol or they'll not drink it, but they'll put it in their mouth,
Spit it out.
squiggle a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and then spit it,
Mm-hmm.
on the issue, and or they will pour palm oil on the rock, right, to cool issue down, right, because he can get heated at or misbehavings, and we don't want issue to intervene violently and trick us into a certain space. So we put the palm oil to calm, issue down.
Mm-hmm.
And in other contexts, it'll represent something else, right? But if you were to just read this in the biblical context, you wouldn't have any kind of background for why was had to be set up in a mountain,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's always in the wilderness. You put these shrines in groves, in the forest or in the mountains or whatnot. This is still African tradition that is being found here in the text. And so being immersed in the tradition, being, Omu Eshu,
Mm-hmm.
myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it stands out. And now I have a particular perspective and background that I can use to interpret what is going on here.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And now I can go further into some historical analysis to see, what other possible relations could this, be, and how are they having these same traditions and same words and all this other kind of stuff amongst the Yoruba and amongst the Hebrews. What's going on?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. And that's kind of been the research, the lifelong research work of individuals like Dr. Modupe Oduyoye, who
Mm-hmm.
interviewed on my
Mm-hmm.
channel. An elder that is in his late 80s, uh, still with us, but he's old school. He don't even have a telephone. He don't have a cell phone,
Right.
nothing
Right.
like that. Lives in Nigeria, out in the outskirts, so you got to find somebody to find him.
Right.
But I had to find somebody to go into the town and find him and set something up, right? So, but real good elder, still sharp,
Mm-hmm.
everything, master linguist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And uh, so that's that. And so then, we asked questions in terms of like, how do I integrate science
Mm-hmm.
into the work I do? So the
Mm-hmm.
first part of that was just, how do I use the culture I belong to interpret phenomena and to spot it in other spaces, to have certain types of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm coming into the space from my computer science background, which is going to play a big part in the linguistics. And so, if you come from a space like computer science or physics or mathematics, and then you come into the social academic spaces and the social fields, you find a certain level of frustration
Mm-hmm.
because of the lack of rigor in these fields, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's no different in linguistics. because linguistics is primarily a social academic space that is more so teeter between, psychology, anthropology, and mathematics in terms of historical comparative linguistics, right? And so in this particular text here, this is mathematical linguistics. So you're seeing more and more, especially for those of us who are into generative AI, right? And into coding, you have to learn linguistics because you're trying to have machines, like when you're dealing with machine learning, to be able to study human language. And if you ask it a prompt, it's able to give you an answer in an understandable human form,
Right.
like human language form, right? So in order to do this, you have to study linguistics, even if it's not necessarily your like primary, field of study. You have to have working knowledge. This is part of that certain aspects of your field, because it's multidisciplinary, means you're going to have working knowledge in other fields in order to adequately do, justice to what you're doing in this space. And so in this text here, in mathematical linguistics, it starts off in the introduction or the preface of the text saying he's describing the focus of the book, and he makes this statement, and he says the book offers a single entry point to the central methods and concepts of linguistics that are made largely inaccessible to the mathematician, computer scientist, of course I had it highlighted on purpose, or engineer, by the surprisingly adversarial style of argumentation, the apparent lack of adequate definitions, and the proliferation of unmotivated notation and formalism, all too often encountered in research papers and monographs in the humanities. So somebody like me who comes from this background and then tries to enter these spaces like linguistics is frustrating, because oftentimes these researchers will come up with rules and then they'll break their own rules in order to come to a particular conclusion that makes sense to them. Right? And this is where the biases come in.
Right. I got you.
And there's it's this continuous back and forth argumentation, because in the humanities there's no such thing as truth. It's your truth. Any place where you can have your truth is a ripe environment for argumentation.
Right.
Versus in particular the physical sciences, science doesn't deal with truth either. And that's something that has to be understood. It deals with probability and statistical analysis. You do experiments over and over again to the point where you have a statistical analysis that you have a probability that if we were to do this experiment one more time, this is the probability that we're going to get the same answer.
Right.
We're going to get the same result.
Right.
But you can never argue for truth in science, because you would have to have an infinite research. You have to have the infinite experimental project with infinite funds in infinite time. It's impractical, because we don't know if, we've done the experiment 1,524 times, and we've gotten the same result all 1,524 times. But you never know. It may take 1,525 times to get a different result.
Right.
There's always that possibility that just one more time and it'll be different, which is why you can't argue for this is the truth. We have a probability that this is close to the truth, versus, it doesn't meet our threshold, for statistical significance.
Right.
Now, in mathematics, you have proof and truth. in logic, you have proof and truth. That's where truth and proof come in.
Mm.
So when somebody tries to ask a historical question and they be like, prove it.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Mm-hmm.
they don't know what they're talking about because proof is of the domain of linguistics and mathematics, not
Mm.
history, not science.
Mm. Right. Right.
Right. So it's these little details and nuances that we have to understand as researchers so
Mm-hmm.
that we know that we have the right procedures and we're using the right language when we're articulating and trying to pass this information on to laypersons. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we're going to get into now the the linguistic arguments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you asked about have I come into kind of these roadblocks when discussing linguistic phenomena in regards to African languages in the service of Africana studies?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer, of course, is yes,
Right.
because historical linguistics and linguistics as a study is kind of birthed from Indo-European people who were in the colonial space, who were colonizing, and they had to document languages so that they can, have conversations with the people, ultimately to uh, exploit them in some way,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But it is just like anthropology and sociology. They all are birthed. These are fields that are birthed out of the colonial space. Not saying that they're not useful, but it's just like Egyptology. All of that is born from the colonial space,
Right.
which means there's a colonial mind behind it, and there had to be a lot of weaving out of things because
Right.
of course, human groups have seen the potential of these fields of study, but it is useless as long as we have these colonial mindsets, right?
Mm-hmm.
But certain ideas in various different fields still linger on, um, and especially in linguistics, especially in African linguistics, because, for example, there's always been a fight for the right to associate with ancient Egypt,
Yeah.
because ancient Egypt is a society in the historical context that has been very influential, have created technologies which were the foundations of certain technologies of today,
Mm-hmm.
certain ideas that are foundations for certain ideas of today. It is a very important and civilization and culture regarding just human history in general, but of course, for us, African history in particular. But there are groups of people who don't even see ancient Egypt in Africa,
Mm.
right? Like you come up with the continent of Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and we agree that this is Africa, and then all of a sudden, when it comes to ancient Egypt, Egypt's no longer in Africa. It's in the
Right.
Middle East,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Right.
you have to fight these moving the goalposts, uh, folks, all the time. Even people who share the same skin tone as you, right? So with that being said, the continental Africans and the Africans in the diaspora who understand themselves in their African context are reading ancient Egyptian texts and looking at ancient Egyptian artwork and phenomena and saying, wait a minute, this stuff looks very familiar
Mm.
because we have this in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
We say these words in our language. We do these exact same rituals. Just like in the first set of slides where I show you the Eshu,
Mm-hmm.
and the same thing in the Hebrew tradition,
Right.
right? Um, it when we move to ancient Egypt, we see the same thing in terms of ritual and ideas and phenomena and worldview that that you can find in West Africa and Central Southern Africa, right? And
Mm-hmm.
folks who allegedly had no interaction with the ancient Egyptians.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to, I'm gonna be answering a lot of the questions and probably some that you haven't asked just yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm trying to kill 100 birds with one stone.
Absolutely.
Right. So
That's
I'm just
it.
going to
That's
just
it.
go through the process. Right. so, so when one method that we can use besides genetics, besides, cultural anthropology and history of migrations and archaeology to show a relationship, either a genealogical or a contact relationship between groups, is through language. And
Mm.
the idea is that there's different levels of relationship. So there are phenomena that are just coincidence, like because human beings can only make so many sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're developing our speech and words in our language, there are bound to just as a statistical phenomenon, you say a word in your language that means the same thing as a word that sounds similar or the same in another language that means the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we call statistical noise, right? And so, but then there's words that sound the same and exist in other languages and grammatical features because of a contact situation.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that, for example, it's there's a level of difficulty in distinguishing, words in ancient Egyptian language from certain words from languages from people who belong in the Sudan, because one, they're close to each other, and two, they've been interacting for thousands of years.
Right.
So it's possible that these words are borrowings in either one of these languages because of intermarriage, because of just interaction and trade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there is genetic inheritance, meaning that there was in some unknown time in the past that there was a group of people who existed and spoke a language, and for some reason they began to splinter off and spread out. And over time, the descendants of that once unified group, um, they created dialects, and then further over time, because they continue to spread out, their dialects are no longer understood, and they haven't interacted with each other, their cousins, in several hundred years, several millennia. And
Mm-hmm.
so now they're understood as different languages. And so if you was to put a person in who speaks the Yoruba language and a person who speaks Zulu language, they will not be able to understand each other.
Right.
But if we can code their language in the form of graphical signs to represent phonemes, or phones and sounds in the language, and then we list in a string form words and morphemes and sentences, and then we do a systematic analysis of it, we can determine that Yoruba and isiZulu are related languages, and that sometime in the distant past, they belong to one language group. They're descendants of a mother tongue, and there are daughter languages of this great mother tongue.
Mm.
And so those words that survive, because words are replaced all the time, those words that survived in both Yoruba and isiZulu that uh, that systematically match each other, even though they're pronounced differently. The only conclusion that you can come to, because there's no there's no evidence that the Amazulu people and the Yoruba people, in the distant past, were interacting with each other, so they borrowed the words. So
Mhm.
our only conclusion is that they must have descended from a common ancestor. And those words that survive in both languages, we call them cognates. And so now I'm giving the definition which you see on the screen.
Mhm.
So a cognate is a word or morpheme that is related to a word morpheme in a sister languages by reason of these words or morphemes having been inherited by the related languages from a common word morpheme of the proto-language from which they descend. And so you have a cognate set, which is a set of cognate words or morphemes, a set of words related to one another in the sister languages because they are inherited and descended from a single word or morpheme of the proto-language, what I just explained earlier. So this is, a kind of generic definition of a cognate, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's understood. But there's so much room for leeway in this definition. So as a computer scientist, I'm not satisfied with that. And this is why like we have these these other texts, and computer scientists and mathematicians who develop more rigorous definitions that will satisfy any computer scientist or mathematician,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
So from the article by S.P. Harrison on the limits of the comparative method, right? Um, we have a working, and I'm gonna change this slightly, this particular formula right here,
Mhm.
and so we won't necessarily go through the formula.
May I ask you a
Um,
question real quick in regards to
Go
this?
ahead,
All right.
go
So,
ahead.
so I've been all right. Linguistics is not my area of study. It's definitely something that I am very interested in, and I listen to you brothers build on it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I've heard you when it comes to the comparative method, things it can make one come to the conclusion that things like Afro-Asiatic uh, may not be. I don't know what the word I'm using for since I'm looking for since I'm not a linguist, but it brings the conclusion. I'm
Sure.
sorry. I'm sorry. What'd you say?
The argument is that from myself and a number of African scholars, Afro-Asiatic, Congo, Nala Saharan, Khoisan are not valid constructs um, to explain, the potential relationship between the languages for which that label encompasses.
Okay. And is that because of the quote unquote limits of the comparative method?
It's not necessarily the limits of the comparative method, it's the non-application of the comparative method. Because
Okay.
Afro-Asiatic and these other languages were not developed using the comparative method. And so this is what I was going to get into. Matter
Okay.
of fact, go to the next slide. So
Mhm.
um so we're going to kind of define something here, and since it's using more common language, that will kind of explain, because I don't want to go through the mathematics of this and understanding functions and the like. But so it says here the problem of proving cognacy for potentially cognate pairs can be reduced to or recast as the problem of defining of a rule of M elimination that licenses the move M cognate F of G, right?
Mhm.
Or, in cognate F of G. The comparative method is an attempt at defining this rule of M elimination. The following is an informal approximation. In elimination, a pair of FG or two potential cognate terms, a potential cognate. So this is a cognate set. So we're saying that F and G are two words, right, that are cognate. That's what the argument is. So this is a set. So this is a cognate set right here. So a pair of potential cognates is a cognate pair if, one, they meet a similarity condition, that F and G are similar in both facets of the sign relation in form and in interpretation. That means form and meaning. Now, this is part where I have to get more specific because the forms don't actually have to match in order for the words to be cognate. There's an extra step in here that means that there exists a series of non-accidental correspondences so that the forms match because there exists a series of similar forms that match in a particular number. So it's basically the I am because we are, and we are therefore I am. Proverb as applied to linguistics. You know, I'm an African American because you're an African American, and your mama's an African American, and my mama's an African, right? I am because we are,
Right.
and we are because I am, right? Like I'm a person in community. I exist in a community. I don't have an individual identity outside of the community in which I exist. Right. And that's exactly what this is saying here. This is not a cognate term. This term, these two terms are not cognate, independent of existing within a community of other cognate terms of the same or similar form, right? So we'll go to part two. And so they meet a disjunctive elimination condition that the similarity is not likely to be a consequence of chance or borrowing or diffusion, what I kind of mentioned earlier, right? So the important thing is, and this is what separates science from pseudoscience, is that there is a mechanism in place to eliminate chance and false positives.
Okay.
That's what makes the scientific method the scientific method. The scientific method is not there to prove an experiment correct. Right. It is there to falsify it, right, to prove it wrong.
Right.
But right, if it stands up to scrutiny, then more than likely, because we don't deal in truth in science, more than likely, this is an accurate representation of reality. So you have to have a process of elimination. If you don't have a way to eliminate the false positives and the obviously wrong information and data from the data set, it's not science. If it is, if your argumentation is unfalsifiable, that's where the unfalsifiability comes in science, in research. And I can't falsify it. There's no way for which we can validate it. Right? So for example, let's just say, I'm in a hospital and I'm praying for somebody to get well and healing. I believe that my prayer to God will heal this person and they're going to get up out of this hospital bed and we'll be back at the club partying this weekend. Right. But I did all this praying, I did all these rituals, and this mofo just dies on us.
Right.
Then I come back and say, well, God, must have wanted him. It was his time to go. So now on the research question, does prayer work? There's no way for me to falsify this because I can pray, but if the prayer isn't answered, it doesn't go my way, I can always give an excuse for why the prayer didn't work.
Right.
It was just his time. So it's unfalsifiable.
Right.
Right. So so in linguistics, we have to have this method of elimination, and that's what the method that was created by Greenberg and his students and followers, like Christopher Arid and the like,
Mm-hmm.
they use this thing called mass comparative method. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no way to eliminate chance, coincidence, and false positives.
Okay.
So it's an unscientific approach. So this is the debate why, for people who try to make these arguments, for example, on why I can't um, use Bantu languages in understanding ancient Egyptian language and phenomena, because the expert, quote unquote, Dr. Joseph Greenberg and all these other folks said that that Egyptian belongs to Afroasiatic and Bantu belongs to Niger Congo. They're not related languages. So they've already prescribed destiny. You can't use Bantu languages in the study of ancient Egyptian.
Right. Right. There's already.
When the accepted method of the field is the historical comparative method, which was not applied to these languages.
Can you break down
So
a little bit before we get into these language patterns? And we talked about mass comparison and how there's no thing to check for false positives. What is the historical method that you were speaking of?
I'm going through it right now. That's what I
Already.
said.
Okay. 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 Okay.
It's going to answer a lot of your
All right. All
questions
right. My bad. My bad. My bad. I'm gonna let you
as we
cook.
cycle through this.
I'm
But
gonna
no,
let you
no, no
cook. My
problem.
bad.
Right. So here I have on the left hand side Proto-Bantu reconstructions.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the comparative method was used with Bantu languages to reconstruct vocabulary roots in Proto-Bantu.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So um, but as we know, the ancient Egyptian language, as it has been passed down to us in the writing script, to our knowledge, it only recorded the consonants of the language and not the vowels.
Mm-hmm.
Not until the Coptic era, in the last stages of ancient Egyptian civilization in its historical context. So in this sense, we're going to have to compare the consonants in Proto-Bantu and Bantu and the consonants in ancient Egyptian in hopes that we get some idea of the probable vowels in the Egyptian.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go through this step by step.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm this is interactive, so I'm gonna be asking you questions as we go through this,
Oh.
right? So that
Okay.
um, so you get a better understanding of the process.
Okay.
So, in the historical comparative method, to show a consistency and regularity in the data set, we have to have at least a minimum of three corresponding basic vocabulary words that we are comparing between two or more languages. And so mine is 5. To be more rigorous, my threshold is a minimum of 5. But for the sake of space and time, we're only
Mm-hmm.
going to do 3, the minimum that is the standard in for historical comparative linguists. So, um, so we're going to go in the first row. So we have in Proto-Bantu bide, meaning breast and teat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these are the roots of the word. So there's prefixes, I can't even speak today, prefixes and suffixes that are not on these words that you will see in the actual languages if we decide to compare them. But you'll see the grammatical morphemes in Egyptian, for example, like this ti or ty at the end. So this denotes the dual, that there's dual. So there's 2 nipples, there's 2 breasts. But do you find any issue with the meaning of these words here? Like breast over here and teat. and which is the nipples,
No.
whatnot, and this word nipples and breasts. So these match, right?
Right.
Even though there's a B right here and a
Mhm.
B in this first consonant position, but there's a D right here and an N in this second consonant position, right?
Mhm.
So off the back, we know that these are different, but they're really only different in the way in which they're pronounced. So pronounce the D sound to yourself.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, now go for the N. Do
Mm. Mm.
Do you notice where you put your tongue?
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. The same place.
It's the same place.
Right.
So this is what we call a homoorganic sound. D and N are homoorganic sounds because you're using the same area, the same organ to make the sounds. It's just the way that your tongue is shaped
Mhm.
and whether you explode sound or not that gives the different sounds. So these are homoorganic sounds. So, but this could be just a coincidence that these two seem to match. So let's
Mhm.
go to the next line. So we have Bade, meaning stone, and then we
Mhm.
have Ben, the sacred stone, which is a reduplication, is repeated twice. So we have stone and stone. We notice that these two words, you know, um, they both have the same consonantal shape, right? Do you have a problem with the word stone here and this word sacred stone here?
No.
Okay. So now we have in Proto-Bantu badik, and we have a dot here because this is a grammatical suffix that is reconstructed for Proto-Bantu, but this is not the root. The root is bod, right?
Mhm.
And then we have this word bin or benoit, to escape, to depart.
Mhm.
So do you have a problem with the matching the meanings flee and fear, to escape, to depart?
No.
All right. So you're noticing a pattern here, right?
Mhm.
That for Egyptian in the first consonant position for these words, there is B, and we find that also with Proto-Bantu. But where Egyptian has N in the second consonant
And
position,
B.
we see D
Mhm.
in the second consonant position in Proto-Bantu. So we can say because these, one time is a coincidence. Oh no, one time is chance.
Mhm.
So if I was just come to say BD, bidet, breast and teat, and binti, nipples and breast are cognates, and this is all I showed you, you can
Mhm.
say that's just a coincidence
Mhm.
that they have a similarity. But then I give you Bade stone and Ben stone. This is a coincidence that these two,
Mhm.
but Badi flee and Benu to escape to depart. Now we have a pattern.
Mhm. Right. Right.
So once we've developed the pattern, so this is how I would write this mathematically. Proto-Bantu BD
Mhm.
informs is equal to Middle Egyptian BN.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, but what if I gave you Proto-Bantu shine?
I'm sorry. What did you say? What did you give me? Proto-Bantu what?
Bottom of the screen if you can see it.
Okay.
BAD.
Oh, okay. What did you?
Shine, to
What did you?
shine.
Yeah.
What if
Uh,
I gave you that? Because remember, shine is not in our
right.
data set here.
Mhm.
So if could you predict the shape of the word in Egyptian for for what is Proto-Bantu Bad shine based upon what we've observed up the top here?
Yes. BN dot something.
Right. So whatever the form or shape is, there is going to be a consonant sequence BN in Egyptian. That's your expectation, right?
Yes.
Right. So this is another aspect of the scientific process, that we discover patterns in our research process that allows for us to make predictions.
Mm-hmm.
So given Proto-Bantu Ba to shine, we have a prediction in Egyptian based upon the regular sound meaning correspondences that we see here, that is going to have some shape like BN in there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly what we see.
Wow.
So our prediction is confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
So I know for a fact that Proto-Bantu Ba to shine is cognate with Ben to shine because of the regular series, that the regular sound meaning correspondence series that we've established here. We created these sound. This is a sound law.
Okay.
So you understand in the process, this is what was not done for the
Mm-hmm.
languages of Afro-Asiatic.
Okay. Okay.
So now, because somebody is an expert, right, who claims that Afro-Asiatic exists and that you can't use Bantu and ancient Egyptian, well, they have a problem. Especially for somebody like myself who's coming from a scientific background. Demonstration beats conversation, because we've already went through the process of elimination going back here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We've eliminated the condition that the similarity is due to chance or borrowing.
Right.
That's
Right.
the process. That's the scientific process of the comparative method. We did that.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your explanatory model that would falsify this when
Mm-hmm.
we've gone through the scientific process?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Right.
when I'm doing this, when I'm having this conversation in another slideshow, I go through the W in front of this Wabin and show that this is also in Bantu, but we won't do that here, right? So let's let's do another experiment here,
Okay.
right? So I'm not sure how familiar you are with ancient Egyptian phenomena, but if you are somewhat familiar, you may have come across the quote unquote Aku, or
Mm-hmm. Right.
the Ak,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is the illuminated spirit of a deceased person. But you know, we say Ak because when we transliterate the word, this word here, into writing, we use capital A because we don't have that sound
Right.
in English.
Okay.
But it's an R type sound. It's
Mm-hmm.
what we call a nasalized uvular trill. So it's really like, and matter of fact, in another text that I written, it a more closely pronunciation is what you find in Yoruba, Orisha.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But let's deal with the isiZulu language. So we're going to do exactly like what we did before. Of course, I always have more examples to as overkill in terms of the sound meaning
Yeah.
correspondences, but we're just going to deal with three
Right.
right now, right? So we have this where Rekhwa or Reku, some would say Aku, which means magical power or mastery. In isiZulu, we have lingo, to perform magic or do tricks in the verb form. Lingo or umlingo in its noun form, unusual, strange, awe-inspiring, or magical performance, trickery, conjuring, or magic. Do you have a problem with these meanings?
No.
Okay, and so as an aid, I've highlighted and bolded the consonants that are to be matched.
Mm-hmm.
So, and which is the third column
Yeah.
to aid in that. So
Mm-hmm.
we have a new word here, aku, and the words have to be different meanings so that um, so that we can see that they're different words. So we have this word here, aku, meaning sunlight, sunshine, light, and this is reduplicated ak or rechi because it's more like a ch, more like a well, some will say k, um, but it could just as easily be sh, or whatnot. But twilight, dawn, dusk, and then we have in isiZulu langa, and we have ililanga or umalanga in a noun, the noun prefixes. So we have shine, sun, heat of the sun, sunshine, sunlight. Do you have a problem with the meanings?
No.
Do you think they're far off?
Yes. No. No. Not at all. No. No. There's definitely. I definitely see the similarities.
Reason why I'm asking you this because there's another requirement in the comparative method that the meanings be closely related because we understand that the word usage depends on the lexicon that you find. So
Okay.
different authors and dictionaries may use slightly different language to speak to the same phenomenon. So they just have to be close enough that they could be the same. So
Mm-hmm.
when we say sunlight over here and sunlight over here, these are exact matches in terms of meaning,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sunshine and shine and light, that's they're exact. And so, but isiZulu is recorded not only that, but the heat of the sun and the sun itself,
Right.
right? So it gives us an expanded meaning, but it contains the exact same meaning as what we find on the left-hand side here in Egyptian. And lastly, aket, or flame, and then we have langu, of flame shooting up, blazing up, of bobbing up and back, langabi, ili langabi, langabi, flame, of fire, pains of severe inflammation, hot temper,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have an expanded meaning, but it has the exact same meanings of fire, flame.
Right.
That's in the definitions.
Right.
So we see the same, not the same pattern as we saw in the earlier example, but we see the same thing as a pattern
Mm-hmm.
where the Egyptian has a nasalized uvular trill in consonant one position. isiZulu has L. When it has this k, this H with the loop under it, we
Mm-hmm.
have the sound in isiZulu. It's
Mm-hmm.
regular, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm going to ask you a question again. If I was to give you this hieroglyph, so this hieroglyph, this is the root here, and this is a determinative,
Mm-hmm.
right? It doesn't have a sound value for the word. It's just there to give you a visual context of the meaning of the word,
Right.
right? So this is the word here. Is what we call a uh, biliteral graphic, and that
Mm-hmm.
means it stands for two consonants in sequence. So the
Okay.
two consonants in sequence that this glyph represents is that same consonant sequence that we were dealing with these words. That's why you
Mm-hmm.
see it in this. If you, I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but
Yes.
uh, this word right here, right?
Ah. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So if so, we're going to do another prediction. So based upon what we've seen here,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
In isiZulu, what kind of shape do you see for to match this consonant sequence?
Uh, you mean the corresponding, I guess we would say letters with the
Yes.
okay
So
L.
for this consonant sequence that we see here, I'm not giving the
Mhm.
meaning of this word,
Yes.
but I'm showing you how you
Hmm.
can you can use what you know
Yeah.
to predict what you don't know.
Yes. So
right?
the
So if I was just to give you this without the meaning, so I just gave you the glyphs,
mhm.
you know that you could probably find this in isiZulu, but what kind? What's the consonant sequence? Not including the vowels, so don't worry about vowels.
Okay. I would say the L and the L for the uh I'm not sure what you call that symbol in the beginning, but for the H and G.
So exactly.
Mhm,
So but just to give you some background, if you're not familiar with the ancient Egyptian script,
mhm.
that determinative is called shepesh, or it's pronounced shepesh, and
Okay.
it's defined. You'll find many definitions with this consonant sequence, like a statue, likeness, a tomb, chapel, libations, a vase, a noble, elegant, riches, to be noble, to be esteemed, to be rich, exalted, reverence, a noble woman, splendid, noble, favorite, eminent. It has these definitions. So if the determinative is it gives you the context for what the word is over here, what do you predict that the word will deal with based upon the possible meanings?
Nobility, some type of uh I guess some type of uh, uh favor, respect, um veneration, admiration type of idea.
Exactly. That's
Mhm,
that's that's what I would predict,
mhm,
right? So now we have a bunch of terms, and just to let you know that when L is followed by I sometimes, or U, um, or preceded by N, it can
mhm.
become D.
Okay.
Right. So that donga that you see here at the bottom, dinga, is still it's we call them allophones. So D and
Mhm,
L are allophones of each other. They're the same phoneme, or they belong to the same phoneme. Um, Even though they're different sounds, they're still the same organic sound, if that makes sense. So just like the L and D that you did earlier, it's the
mhm,
same thing with L and D. They're home
mhm,
organic sounds. So they're
mhm,
allophones of each other. So, but let's look at these words here. So Ilunga, Amalunga, a member, an official. Ilunga, Amalunga, a limb or joint. That doesn't seem to match the determinative, so we can eliminate that. Lunga, get in order, get correct, get fit, get prepared, get ready. Um, maybe not. Mungu, Abalungu, a white person. We can eliminate that. Linga, to hang or dangle, swing. We can eliminate that. Linga, attempt, try, tip. We can eliminate that. Donga, udonga, izzy, and donga, a wall. There's nothing there that just know that it's a wall. Dinga, need or require. Given that this is a symbol for excellence and nobility, he probably wouldn't need nothing. He probably wouldn't be
right,
homeless.
right, right,
So
right,
we can
right.
eliminate that. Dingo must necessarily need requirement. That's all in the same group here. And so you would have here a Malungu, a blessed ancestral spirit. So which one of these you think will probably, you
Mulungu,
know,
Mulungu.
and I would say also as well that a great potential is Ilunga Amalunga, a member or an official.
Yes, 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 yes.
So within that same, you know, bit. And so now I give uh, the definition is found in the dictionary. So the Ak means deceased ancestor or spirit. When it has the M in front of it, Imak, it means a revered one. So thus, when it complements that this glyph here, the man seated down on a royal chair holding a royal emblem of kingship. So it lets you know that that's why I said this member and official, that could be it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual meaning of the word is a deceased ancestor or spirit, a revered one. And so you find, for example, in the Vundao language, Mulungu, blessed ancestral spirit, which is closely related to isiZulu, um, but it's found in like Mozambique and and just above it, where the Ndao people are, the Vandal people.
Okay.
And so, you have other words that's related to the successful, right, glorious, etc. But the actual cognate in isiZulu is Itongo, the blessed ancestral spirit. And Vande is going to be Mulungu. And so I think they borrowed the term in isiZulu, Mulungu, but their word is Itongo. And so we can do the same thing here to show the sound meaning correspondences. And I don't know why I have Chiluba up here. That's supposed to be isiZulu. So this is Zulu, not
Mm-hmm.
Chiluba. So this is a
Okay.
mistake on my part. But this is this column here is isiZulu. And
Okay.
and I have several different Zulu dictionaries. So sometimes you'll see the word as "s," like Ithongo,
Mm-hmm.
and in other ones you'll see Itongo,
Okay.
right? They're the same. So it may be dialectical, uh, and so, but I won't go through that. But I'm just showing this so when they come back, they can see the sound meaning correspondences, just like what we did
Yes.
before, and even with some other sounds, and which I'll have to explain. I don't want to go too far into
Mm-hmm.
some of these other words here, but the itongo, that's what you would call the ak in isiZulu, but mulungu in the Vandaya language and Bantu languages. And so I'm gonna do one last example
Okay.
in terms of this, because the whole point of this is to show you how I use science,
Mm-hmm.
logic, and mathematics
Mm-hmm.
in linguistics to have historical conversations and anthropological and philosophical conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So this tells us right here that the concept that is in ancient Egypt as the Ak exists amongst Bantu people. Now the Ak is um, the deceased ancestor, right? The spirit of someone who has lived already but died. But there's another essential part of the person that is called the Ba, right? Or we say it's Ba, but
Yes.
it's Be,
Yes.
because there's now you see the syllable, now this that first sign that we saw beforehand is now in the second consonant position. So
Mm-hmm.
it's usually defined in the ancient Egyptian dictionaries as the soul or the spirit,
Yes.
right? And so this is how it is commonly represented in the ancient Egyptian text. It
Mm-hmm.
has the human head of a person but the body of a bird.
Mm. Okay.
So
I
this is
guess
the bird. So
does
this
that have anything with the idea of the soul or spirit taking flight?
that's part, they integrated those ideas, but there's also another phenomenon in linguistics called paronymy.
Okay.
And paronymy is the idea that words that sound alike or sound similar must necessarily be related to each other, and what they represent must be linked on
Mm-hmm.
some level.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
we know as a result of modern linguistics that this is not the case,
Mm-hmm.
but before linguistics became an academic study and just in the culture, the ancestors said that these words sound alike, they must be connected in some way.
Right.
This is how we get much of the culture that we have.
Mm-hmm.
That's why a king sits on a throne and holds a staff and has the leopard skins.
Mm.
Because at one time in the past, all these words sounded alike in the mother tongue language.
Mm.
So they became the emblems of royalty. The
Mm-hmm.
word for king, the word for staff, the word for the throne, the seat, and the word for leopard and leopard skin.
Right. Right.
So it's in this same thing here. The word for bird or the pigeon or a dove and the word from the mind and soul. That's why the head is the symbol here.
Okay.
Because this word for that becomes soul and spirit etymologically derives actually from a word meaning the heart or the liver or the lungs.
Mm-hmm.
Because these are the essential vital organs of the body that keep you alive.
Hmm.
They're the inside, they're the core of who you of your physical body.
Right.
And the philosophy of Africa is that for every physical being or existing thing, there also exists an intangible
Hmm.
reflection of it,
Right.
which we would call the shadow. So you have a shadow self, you have a double of yourself, but it also represents the core of your mind, your intelligence, and the like. And we'll get
Hmm.
to that.
Okay.
So, Dr. Alan Anselin, in his text, some notes about, excuse me, it's an article in a larger text, in an edited text. It's called Some Notes. He mainly writes in French, but this is in English. So,
Okay.
some notes about an early African pool of cultures from which emerged the Egyptian civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he's giving you the breakdown of this word, so that we say ba, but it's
Wow.
not ba. It's more like bal, bar,
Mm-hmm.
bel, bur, something like that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so you have, for example, in the Chadic languages, bel, reason, sense, to be wise, intelligence, understanding. In the
Mm-hmm.
Matakam, genius, spirit. In the Mboko language, bel bele ha, a genius. And you know, a genius is just it's a guardian spirit.
Mm. Okay.
So
Okay.
so when so we've changed the meaning of a genius. So
Right.
when we think of genius today, we think it's because of ourself.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
ancient days, the genius was a guardian spirit who would feed you information.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Right. All right. So you get it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
but that was also your double. The
Mm-hmm.
genius was your double, your spirit double.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so in Fulani, Fulfulde, Mbelu, vital principle in man. In Semitic, you have Baal, spirit, mind. Aramaic, Blah, spirit, intelligence. In North Syriac, reason, attention. In Arabic, attention, consciousness, mind. So when
Mm.
you're talking about the spirit of a person, you're not only talking about the vital force that empowers the body, you're also talking about the mind. That's why all the words for heart in African languages also doubles to mean mind, spirit, soul, intelligence, wisdom, etc.
Okay.
And you find this in Semitic languages, you find this in the inter-African languages, right?
Yeah.
And then he continues and he shows that the word for bird or dove has the same shape. So he talks about the bob being symbolized by a bird, a turtle dove, and the soul carries the same consonant cluster set as the word for bird in African languages. So he goes back again to Western Chadic, Mbole, and these are all languages here: Mupum, Sura, Mbul, Angus, Bul, Ankwa, Nietzsche, Kera Kera language, Balawi, in Eastern Chadic, in the Gabri language, Belu, bird, Badia language, Balia, dove, Proto-Chadic, Imbul, dove,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we go to isiZulu again, down in
Mm.
South Africa, we have Belu, or
Mm.
Isibelu,
Mm-hmm.
the white-breasted dove. What color is the front of the bird here?
Would you say? You were kind of breaking up. So, what was in front of the bird?
What color
Uh huh.
is in front of the front of the bird here?
White.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So isiZulu has the exact word for this is belu,
Wow. Wow.
white-breasted dove,
Wow.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So um so you'll find again, different words in the African languages. In Bantu, it can be pronounced boy or Billy, spirit, soul, and then remember that the heart, um, lungs, liver, and also the chest. So that's
Mm-hmm.
why this is Billy, chest.
Mm-hmm.
But in Chiluba is Mvidi, spirit. But also you have in Chiluba Lu Mvwilu, understanding, intelligence. In Kikongo, Bendo, electronically radiated shadow. And in Bambara, we have Ba, the essence of a person, a spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Wow.
So
Right.
we're seeing these concepts. So I'm saying this to say when they talk about that you can't use Bantu in ancient Egyptian, what are you talking about?
Mm.
Because it's the Bantu that'll help explain the phenomena in ancient Egypt because they descend from the same mother tongue,
Mm-hmm.
right? So let's get some understanding from the text, right? So here's a graphic of a wall tomb, the tomb of Amenakhet. It's the Thebans tomb 218 in the Ramesside period. So this is the 19th dynasty. And so you see the human headed bob bird with the white in the front. So we know this
Yeah.
is a white tail, a white chested dove
Right.
or pigeon, right? Which is Isibelu in Isizulu. And you see this all black figure here
Mm-hmm.
is letting us know that this is the shadow. This is not
Wow.
this is the shadow, it's the double,
Right. Right.
right? And it's
Right.
saying the Ba leaving and returning to the tomb in the shadow with phallus, right? And I've discussed this in my 2020 text, Alluja Volume 2. So
Mm-hmm.
there's I'll show you where the source is in there. But there's another text here by Tariq Assad.
Mm-hmm.
It's a chapter in a larger text, but his chapter is titled "Sleep in Ancient Egypt,"
Okay.
and he says the following about the Ba. This description of multi-dimensional levels of the self has something to do with sleep, as the
Mm.
ancient Egyptians believed in the ability of the Ba soul to travel beyond the physical body during sleep. The Ba was represented in hieroglyphics as a human-headed bird floating above the sleeping body. In
Mm.
that sense, sleep was viewed to be similar in some aspect to death, in which the person is in a different state of a different world. Being strong believers in the afterlife, sleep was considered as a way or outlet to that mysterious world, and a means through which a person could communicate with the dead as well as his gods. For this reason, it is not surprising to find some rituals related to sleep to resemble what is adopted in preparation for death.
Wow.
Right? So
Mm-hmm.
just to give you some context, and this is just an additional note that this is a different text, the Handbook of Egyptian Mythology. And so Geraldine Pinch is the name, and he states on page 85, it was probably the Ba of a person that was thought to be able to enter the divine realm in sleep and converse with gods and spirits. Why am I stressing this? Why I'm giving these sources,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now, this is a text here. Um, I won't go through the linguistics to show and prove. I'll do that for a second language that I'm gonna do. So keep it consistent with the isiZulu and Bantu and Vandai that we mentioned earlier. But I just wanted to put this as a second. So what is the Ba or the Bir in ancient Egyptian is called Biu
Mm-hmm.
in the Songoi language or Songhai language. So this is West Africa.
Okay.
So notice what he's. So this is Dr. Hasimi Omaru Maega. I had the opportunity to meet him a couple of times, and
Dope.
I got this book, Balancing Written History with Oral Tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm just read what's on the screen. So he says, besides the Hunde, which is vital force in the Songhai language, there is the Biu, or the Ba, the double, which is the reflection or the shadow of the living soul. The double is not attached to the body On the contrary, the double remains separate from the body but is always nearby. A person who is separated from his bio or his ba becomes ill until the bio returns. For example, the Songhai explains dreams, possession, and even clairvoyance through the bio, the ba, which actually is the one who has these experiences. The dream, for example, is just a reflection of what the bio has experienced while the person was sleeping. Some magic practices consist of replacing the bio with something else other than one's own double. After death, the bio remains beside the deceased and goes tormented to the other world unless the descendants of the deceased person give the double another place in which to reside. For instance, Toru or stone, which is important because this is why you see, and this is just kind of a sidebar, this is why you see the stone monuments of deities and deceased ancestors. You call the spirit back to the stone.
Right, right.
So that you can have a conversation. This is why we have the rocks and the stones on our altars, which is why we have the rocks and the stones at the beginning of the conversation at the cross, because you invite the spirits there to have the conversation. This is why Yahweh told Jacob to go to the mountain and to bring the stone, because that's where he was going to visit. Right. That's why he visits mountains, which are just big rocks.
Right.
Right. This is how all this comes together. So, on the other hand, in the case of the brutal or accidental death, the BO double still survives, wonders, and takes revenge upon the living. The double then becomes a dangerous and frightening ghost among the living. As a result, the world is subject to an inevitable fate, a series of shocks and their extreme consequences. However, this imbalance was necessary in order to achieve a final balance. So, I just wanted to emphasize that you have the Ba as a linguistic and a philosophical and religious concept, not only in ancient Kemet, but also amongst the modern Songhai people, still alive and well. And this is why, for example, because the ancient Egyptians were writing only for the ancient Egyptians. Right. They weren't writing for outside folks. So they don't explain a lot, which is why you get all this guessing by Egyptologists sometimes. A lot of it is, based upon the text. They're trying to surmise what is going on based upon the text, but the text is written for people who already know what's going on and speak the language, which we no longer do in the modern time.
Right.
So this is why we have to follow the advice of Dr. Modupe Oduyoye, who I spoke of earlier. This is him on the right-hand side. And so in an article in this text, Traditional Religion in West Africa, what Egypt does not explain should be sought for elsewhere in the extended family.
Interesting.
So if we were confused on what the Ba is, well, you just find the Ba in related cultures and languages. And the way that we do that to confirm that it's in fact this is the exact same phenomena is the historical comparative method, which links the two groups together in a rigorous and scientific and academic way. Right?
Yeah.
So this is what we do, for example, in Chiluba. So you have, for example, we go through the process. Bye-bye, whirlpool, inshore eddy, Mvunde, whirlpool of wind, Chiamvunde, whirlwind, also Kiampumpu, right? Whirlwind. The Bawi, the Bawi, the Barawi, a magistrate. That means, someone of the royal court, of the an official. In modern day, we say like a congressperson, your mayor, your somebody of that ilk. They work for congressional positions, right?
Right.
So But the concept is based upon this notion of importance and bigness. So we know this through Chiluba, for example, Vunda, become big, become strong, become important.
Yes.
Vunda, charge like a buffalo, throw to the ground. Vula, and Ind and Le are allophones of each other, just like L and D are allophones in
Okay.
isiZulu, and it's they're allophones in Chiluba as well. So vula, to multiply, to increase, to become numerous. Muvulu, abundance, fertility, fecundity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you have, of course, you have the ba, to be a soul, to be a spirit, manifestation, and then you have invidi, spirit, and invidie, departed spirit, tree of spirits, right? And then you have Ba with the human head. And then we saw earlier in these where we show that there's also a relationship between, and reason, intelligence, understanding,
Yes.
attention, et cetera, right?
Yes.
And so we see the same thing here in Chiluba, Luimwilu, understanding and intelligence, right? So and of course, I have dozens upon dozens of correspondences, so that even if you don't believe one or two of them,
Right.
you can't dismiss all 25 that I have,
Right.
right? That's because we can play the numbers game. I
Right.
got you,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
So, um, again, we're going to go to the Vundayu, uh, Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and isiZulu Zulu, aka South Africa. So there's an old text called Race, Language, and Culture by France Boas. And in this, he's talking about the concept of this. There's a section in there titled "The Concept of the Soul" amongst the Vandau, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so he states the following: Life is called Vyomi. In Zulu is Ubutongo. Remember what we said about Tongo
Mm-hmm. Yes.
earlier?
Mm-hmm.
What we proved? So so it's going to be along those same lines, right?
Okay.
So life is called Vyomi, and it's called Ubutongo. And Ubu is the abstract prefix in Zulu.
Okay.
The Zulu word is also used in Chiindau. So Chiindau is the Vandau language, just like the Baluba people, but Chiluba language.
Mm-hmm.
The Waswahili people, the Kiswahili language.
Right.
So
Okay.
when you see Chiindau, we're speaking about the language.
Okay.
Using Chiindau in the form of Vutongo, right?
Okay.
The prefix shows that is an abstract term, just as I mentioned. So living man has a body, muvili. The plural is mivili in Chiindau. And
Mm-hmm.
I inserted this just for discussion. So in Chiluba, that same word is mubidi for body, form, and color. So anything that has a body, a shape, or a texture that can be seen is mubidi.
Okay.
But anything that can't be seen in Chiluba is mvidi, the
Okay.
spirit.
Right.
You get it?
Mm-hmm.
So they're reflections. Mvili, you're going to see. So body in Chiindau is Mvili, which is mubidi in Chiluba, and a bavuli, plural being mabavuli, in okay, let me back up what I'm talking. So living man has a body, which is muvili, and a buvili, which Zulu, the equivalent is isitunzi. The buvili is alive and indestructible. It is not indissolubly connected with the body, just like the bio.
Mm-hmm.
The shadow or reflection of an object is also called bavuli. Bavuli is an essential part of existence only in man. In dreams, the bavuli appears or leaves the body. And both bavuli and the body have life, viomi. The
Wow.
bavuli is never sick. When a person dies, that body is without life, which stays with the bavuli. That is, the bavuli remains alive while the body is dead. So the body, again, is muvili.
Right.
In Chiendao, in Chiluba is mubidi. But the spirit, the soul, is bavuli, which appears and leaves the body in a dream state. Right?
Right.
It continues. After death of a person, the bavuli becomes a mulungu, plural valungu, synonym of mujimu. The latter term may be derived, and we're talking about mujimu, may be derived from the stem jima, kujima, meaning to extinguish. The corresponding Zulu terms are itango, plural amatango, and used also in Chiendao in the form tongo, plural matango. The synonym is isituta, used in Chiendao in the form situta. The mulungu has the form and character of the deceased. The term Wuvuli is also used for the mulungu, meaning that he is the shadowy, unsubstantial image of the dead one. With this meaning, the mulungu is also called moya, meaning wind and air, and impepu. And that moya in Chiendau is the moyo in Kikongo and the moyo in Chiluba, which means heart, spirit, soul, intelligence, etc., etc. Right, but in it's umoya in Isizulu, also meaning intelligence, but also wind and spirit. Okay? Because remember, the words for heart double as the word for liver and the word for lungs, and the word for lungs also doubles as the word for wind and breath and air, since that's the principal organ for which you breathe. Right.
Right. Right.
So this is how all these things come together. So, and in Pepo wind, because like the air, it cannot be touched and held. The Mulungu does not stay with the body, but follows the family. The Mulungu retains the name of the deceased. He is immortal and cannot be reborn. Every family venerates its own Valunga, the plural of Mulungu. Right? So we already did the analysis on what Mulungu is. It's the Aku, the Raku, the Orisha, the blessed ancestral spirit. And so, just like in ancient Kemet, among the Chiendau, he has both a Ba, they both have Ba, or Ber, which is the Buvuli in the Chiendau. And when the person dies, the Buvuli is also, it gets a new title called Mulungu. Just like the spirit of the deceased gets in ancient Kemet, which is called the Aku or Mulungu. So this is just an example, and I'll end it here. And I know it's kind of long-winded.
No, that's dope, though.
So
We
I'll stop
appreciate
sharing. Sharing. And so the whole purpose of that is to show you my process.
Yes.
How I go about using a scientific process to link two cultures and to have that to be able to use that as a foundation to be able to explain African phenomena. And so the Eurocentric approach would not link these two because they already made up in their mind what is reality without doing the necessary steps to validate that construct. But when we do the correct construct, we're able to link these cultures in a very serious way, which allows us to explain the African phenomena. Yeah. And so not only does my immersion in African culture as practitioners of African wisdom traditions aid, that's my bias, but to eliminate my bias in parts where I need it eliminated, that's where I have the scientific process.
Right.
So I just don't say, well, these words sound alike.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They must be. No. Let me take my bias out of this. Let me go through the process and eliminate chance and coincidence and diffusion as a reason for this. So now that I've done the scientific process, now I can go back and do what Mudupe Odioye, what Egypt does not explain, look for it in the related cultures. So we have to determine what is the related culture first. Once we've determined the relationship, now we can get some understanding.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we expect, because of time and distance, that certain nuances would have changed, but the principle of these two concepts and these two, actually four cultures which we examine are the exact same.
Right.
So this tells us something. So now we can go back to mathematics and statistics, and we can make some charts and start doing a cluster analysis, right? And see, who does ancient Egypt, when we start examining all these phenomena, who did it cluster closer to? The people in the Middle East, Europe, East Asia, the Americas, or in Central and West Africa?
And I would say Central.
This is the process.
Yeah.
You know, that you have to do. I mean, you know, we expect to have some correspondences with the Middle East, but we can always argue, well, that's a result of diffusion and contact, because they've been in constant contact with each other. But you already make the argument, not you personally, but you know, Eurocentric researchers, they'll say, well, the Baluba have nothing to do with ancient Egypt. The Songhai have nothing to do with ancient Egypt. The Amazulu have nothing to do with ancient Egypt. I bet. I'll take that.
Yeah.
So now you have to explain this.
Right.
Because what this means is the implications of the research that we always have to be mindful of. The implications of this research state that the Yoruba, the Amazulu, the Songhai, the the Vandau, etc., they all, and ancient Egyptians, all belong to the same ancestral culture, and that they split. And so if you want to have the argument on whether the ancient Egyptians were black or not, you know, and then you want to go with race as a social construct and all this other kind of stuff, let's say you're right. And because now, let's just say the ancient Egyptians are not black folks. How did you get African ideas and concepts and rituals and religious and the terms for everyday phenomena like the sun, the stars, rocks, you know, husband, wife? How did you get those terms if there was no either contact or no historical relationship? Right. What's your explanatory model?
Right.
For that?
Do they have one that they try to pass to explain these things?
No. Their method is to simply dismiss it.
Yeah.
To categorically dismiss it. And so this is where we come back to the question surrounding, do you just off the bat believe experts? The answer is hell no.
Right.
No one in the scientific community that is worth anything does that. It's always based upon the quality of the research. You know, what's the evidence? What steps did you do to eliminate chance, false positives, coincidence, right? What were those steps? Are they clearly explained? Can I reduplicate your work?
Right.
With slightly different variables.
Right.
Once you start answering these questions, that's how you attack. I shouldn't say attack an expert, but that's how you attack an expert's argument.
Mm-hmm.
You don't accept what they say just because they're an expert or labeled an expert, and you don't reject outright what they say
Yeah.
because they're an expert but of a different school.
Right.
Right? But just because they're European people and Eurocentric
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you just a priori dismiss what they have to say.
Facts. Right.
It's always based upon the reason, the logic, the evidence that is being presented
Mm-hmm.
for the overall argument.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's all that's worth anything.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else is less than civilized.
Right. Right. Wow.
So
Brother.
what you have to do as a researcher and person that's interested in these subjects is that you have to learn the history of the discipline
Mm-hmm.
and the research methods that are accepted in the discipline. And then you have to do your own work to see if you can reduplicate what the experts are doing,
Mm-hmm.
or you can find fault in there. But there's no way around you having to know what is the standard in the field, not
Right.
the standard conclusions. What
Right.
is the standard research methods? I don't even argue with folks on conclusions because
Mm-hmm.
conclusions can change.
Yeah.
It is always about the method, the process of knowing.
Right. Wow. Brother Asar, thank you for that. That was, when I asked you to, like kind of show your methodology, like you really did that. And I appreciate it being also, interactive in a sense, because I think that will help the audience who is following along um, be able to see and understand your methodology. And, I guess just the process, because it helped me to understand, right? Like, and so I appreciate the way you did that. Um, Everybody, make sure if you aren't already subscribed to Asar Imhotep's channel, make sure you go subscribe now. Also in the description, his website where you can purchase his books. And make sure you continue to support Brother Asar and the works that he's doing. Again, always appreciate having these conversations with you, brother, and I look forward to the next time. And thank you for coming on.
Indeed, maybe we need some hip hop conversation. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
in
Nah,
the
nah,
future.
that was dope, man. I appreciate the interactive nature of it because I mean it's good. It's somebody who is not a linguist and who hasn't studied much of it, but I do watch you and you know others who are uh, building on their ideas and these words, comparative method, and even when you kind of look it up all the time, it doesn't always give you that same understanding as whenever you can see it applied in real time. So that was dope, man, and I appreciate you again.
Again, thank you for having me. And I
Indeed,
look forward to next time.
indeed, brother.